Ladies and gentlemen, this is the main event. The showdown will take place. Steve Dr. Ned Williams puts the title on the line against Village's Sid Vicious.
Good to see you again too, Herbie. Back in December, I looked back at Herb Abrams' attempt to take his Universal Wrestling Federation to the next level via its first ever pay-per-view event, Beach Brawl. To Abrams' disappointment, the event was nowhere close in the ballpark of what he or everyone involved were hoping for. This not only caused issues for the UWF, but also increased Herb's personal habits that were beginning to take priority over finding the next step in his now struggling promotion. But thanks to the success that WrestleMania 9 had in Las Vegas, this opened one final window of opportunity for Herb to venture back into the wrestling business and hopefully get the UWF back to where he felt it needed to be in the gambling capital of the world. While on paper, the stacked card held at the new MGM Grand Garden Arena could help bring some eyes back to this little company that could, it ended up being more of a nail in the coffin for the Universal Wrestling Federation. Wearing his yellow ostrich skin cowboy boots with the UWF branding, Mr. Electricity himself seemed extra excited, likely due to his favorite pastime, despite Rome essentially burning around him and his dreams of becoming a national promotion alongside the WWF and WCW fading by the moment. Although Herb himself was quoted later saying, "Yeah, but I had the MGM," that alone wouldn't have been enough to save it all. Today we take a look at the UWF's 3-hour Supercard event in Vegas, with some major matchups that had to be changed and just as many confusing and controversial moments that certainly helped this show stand out for Herb and the promotion, just not for the reasons he hoped. How will this fare compared to Beach Brawl? Well, there's only one way to find out. So let's watch the Universal Wrestling Federation's final event, Blackjack Brawl. So what's happened to Herb and the Universal Wrestling Federation since we looked at Beach Brawl? The UWF's deal with SportsChannel America to air Fury Hour expired in September, leaving Herb one more set of tapings, and with the help of Howard Brody, who Abrams brought in to help get the UWF into the Florida area, used footage from Ladies Major League Wrestling to help fill out the remaining episodes before Fury Hour was pulled off the air. Herb was less concerned about his own company, despite the financial losses, and more of how much partying could be done, as well as a particular interest he would take in, heavily at times. As it would be revealed on the Dark Side of the Ring episode covering him, Abrams ended up in a constant state of paranoia while engaging in some outrageous antics behind the scenes. Meanwhile, the UWF would find its new home in June of 1992 as the show moved to the Prime Ticket channel, nowadays the FanDuel Sports Network, under the new name Thunder Hour. The months-long run on Prime consisted of a TV taping from the Spartanburg Memorial Auditorium, along with re-airings of its VHS releases and the aforementioned LMLW matches under the moniker Wild Women of Wrestling. The only major thing of note from this era of the UWF was Herb involved in a storyline where, after reversing Ivan Koloff's victory against Jimmy Valiant due to interference from Colonel Red, he would get attacked and bloodied by the Colonel before being stretchered out. This all leading to a quick but infamous promo from Abrams.
Colonel Red, no one has ever done something like this to me! I am going to get you once and for all!
No revenge came from this, as the UWF would not broadcast any more Thunder Hour episodes despite having an unaired taping from July. Otherwise, Abrams was dealing with legal matters from his various arrests on top of a divorce. And despite the rollercoaster of events, Herb looked towards one last opportunity to keep the company afloat, thus bringing us to Blackjack Brawl, taking place on September 23rd, 1994. As mentioned earlier, a lot of the card would end up being changed by the time this special went live, with it initially put together by the UWF's booker Zoog's Rift, who left months earlier after being fed up with how Herb handled the company. With Abrams now needing to handle the booking, and it's very clear he had his hands on this show, the lineup was going to be completely changed, including the main event between Steve Williams and Terry Funk, as Herb didn't want to pay Funk's booking fee. Originally, this was planned to be the first of a series of specials to air on SportsChannel. They're kind of equivalent to the Clash of Champions, though the lack of info about any other Blackjack Brawls should really tell you how far that plan got. Speaking of WCW, while that company would mostly fill out the MGM Grand Garden Arena for future Halloween Havoc pay-per-views, this event would only have an attendance of 600, despite the local promotion and with over half of the tickets being free. We open on clips from Fury/Power Hour and various wrestlers from the Blackjack Brawl press conference, with Herb Abrams doing the narration and being in the ring live to welcome the handful in attendance before introducing his co-host Blackjack Mulligan to the ring to hype up the card, as we're then introduced to our UWF broadcast team, Carlo Gianelli and the Golden Greek John Tolos, as well as special guest ring announcer, stand-up comedian Steve Rossi. Rossi reads a prepared statement about the event and those on staff for the show, while mentioning that we get 11 title matches on this special, despite that 2 of those matches are not for a title belt. Out of the 9 championships on the line, 5 of the crowned champions tonight are both the first and last to ever hold those titles. We finally get into the action with the America's Championship decided between Johnny Ace, replacing Tito Santana, with Missy Hyatt in his corner against Dangerous Dan Spivey. And just to get it out of the way, yes, Steve Rossi is already overstaying his welcome during his announcer duties in the opener.
Let me hear it, everybody. Start yelling and shouting out there. We're going to have a great night of wrestling here at the MGM Grand Arena. You can do better than that, folks. Let me hear it. Johnny Ace. Look at this guy. And look at this lady, his manager here.
Carlo is already fawning over Hyatt as the bell rings, with Laurinaitis rolling up Spivey, leading to a tie-up in the corner where Spivey gets in some shots. Commentary brings up Dan and his former partner Sid Vicious splitting up not too long ago. Surely this won't be an issue during the world title match, right? Ace blocks a running attack in the opposite corner and nails a springboard crossbody for the 2 before drop-kicking Spivey, sending him rolling to the outside while knocking over a random table that's set up but never gets used. Dan gets back on track by throwing Ace to the floor, where Ace suddenly gets back in to cut his opponent off, while John Tolos claims those stomps would, end game any normal man. Things finally slow down with a traditional chin lock that Dan gets out of with a Saito suplex, though his follow-up leg drop fails to connect when the inventor of People Power moves away. Both men trade some more blows, with Spivey going after the back and getting some near falls off the backbreaker and Russian leg sweep. Johnny again avoids a running attack to hit the back suplex, flying off the top with a clothesline, but can't win the America's title. A series of reversals lead to Spivey nailing a DDT, continuing to target the back via the abdominal stretch, though it doesn't stay locked in for long, as Ace is then hit with a side slam that almost gets missed when the camera stays on Missy Hyatt. Dan locks in one more stretch when Hyatt throws in the towel for Johnny, though you can barely see the towel flying into the ring, turning her back on Ace to help one half of the Skyscrapers leave Vegas with the UWF gold around his waist. Herb Abrams refuses to give the belt to Spivey, with Dan taking it and getting the hell out of Dodge with Missy Hyatt. But Mr. Electricity and Johnny Ace share their frustrations at everything that just went down, and I'm about to share my own frustrations with knowing that this is only the first match to sit through tonight. The only good thing from this part of the show was wanting to see the Rolling Stones perform at MGM over any of this. A funny thing to point out is right before they cut to commercials, there's a graphic that appears saying a Curt Hennig promo was about to take place. Curt was in the building for the show, but would end up getting pulled since he was still under contract to the WWF, and with finances already being a problem for Mr. Abrams, was not wanting to deal with any more fees that couldn't be paid. The state of this goddamn company. Back in the MGM Grand, Gianelli and Tolos hype up the upcoming junior heavyweight title match between Wildman Jack Armstrong and Mando Guerrero, not Guerrero as they somehow managed to botch. Things don't get any better for Mando when it comes to his entrance music. And to steal a phrase from Brian Zane, I'm really hoping that was just a bad rib. Carlo and the Golden Greek go over their Spanish while Wildman showboats for the crowd as the action starts with Mando cutting his opponent off from the ropes and tossing him before Armstrong retaliates. Hector and Eddie's brother gets the advantage from a head scissors and keeps Jack down by going after the left arm. Wildman sends the action to ringside by tossing Guerrero into the barricade, but gets his receipt when Mando lands a springboard moonsault. The crowd make more noise here than in the opener as Jack Armstrong gets himself busted open, somehow, while Carlo mentions that this is the first of 3 Blackjack Brawls planned to take place. Brother. Guerrero gets a close count off the spinebuster as he looks for the moonsault when Armstrong moves, and the Wildman gets in 2 elbows to get the win, and out of nowhere become the UWF's only junior heavyweight champion. Herb continues his completely sane behavior by telling Armstrong,
I can't say I'm happy to have you as champion, but I'm glad you got busted up. Ah. You, Herb Abrams, are a sick bastard! You know that?
I mean, he's not wrong for saying that, as he then gives props to Mando before going to a pre-tape promo of Sunny Beach promising to defeat Dr. Feelgood. The graphic calls this next bout a special television match, but is actually to crown a new SportsChannel TV champion as Dr. Feelgood is accompanied by Missy Hyatt. With Hyatt keeping an eye on Feelgood's medical kit, Sunny Beach gets in a roll-up and then targets the doctor's arm in a hole that John Tolos calls the sleeper octopus. Okay then. A hip toss and arm drag transitions this match onto the mat as the surfer backdrops his opponent for a 1 count, going back to keeping things grounded. The former WWF enhancement talent finds his opening, striking Beach's back and giving Missy a chance to use her shoe as a weapon while the referee just lets it slide. Feelgood gets some cheap shots in the corner but almost loses the match when Sunny backslides him out of a reversal, with Beach getting momentum back after an overhead belly-to-belly and gut-wrench suplex. Dr. Feelgood gets back on offense as he heads towards his medkit and pours something onto his towel while Missy presumably distracts the referee since they don't show it on camera. It turns out to be chloroform on the rag, but Sunny recovers enough to take it and shove it into Feelgood's face to get the 3 count and win the SportsChannel belt. Missy throws a tantrum and slaps Sunny Beach in retaliation, but before Sunny can do anything, the doctor gets back up to use his rag and knock the winner out. Blackjack Mulligan comes down to hold the two accountable for their actions when the doctor is about to respond and then doesn't since they need to go to commercial. The first commercial here is supposed to promote the UWF's merchandise, but the true spotlight of this, as it should be, is on Psycho Sid.
The finest merchandise in the world, Dr. Feelgood. What do you think, huh? What do you think, Doctor? This is the best stuff. This is the best stuff. Whoa! Whoa! It's the biggest. No, Sid, I am walking around here. I'm trying to find the MGM Grand. The building I'm supposed to wrestle at. Sid, you're at it. I'm here. I finally made it. To get a picture of me on a t-shirt is the same, my friends, of getting an autographed baseball from Nolan Ryan. You've got Steve the Wild.
Herb Abrams explains what the UWF was originally meant to be, and more so to explain why Bruno Sammartino isn't at Blackjack Brawl. Coming back from another break, where Cowboy Bob Orton looks to regain the UWF Southern States Championship against the man formerly known as Ludwig Borga, now going by Finland Hellraiser Thor. Okay, so aside from the terrible name, the two men kick things off with a lockup that has Thor outpowering Randy's dad, as John Tolo says that compared to Ludwig, Bob
is a big man too, 232, 235 pounds, a great wrestler, a great champion, Southern States champion, and he looks like a midget. He looks like a midget compared to this Thor.
They're about the same size and build there, Tolos. The cowboy takes a breather to figure out a game plan against Borga, as both men end up in the corner with Finland! Failing to connect a running attack on the opposite side. Tolos and Gianelli hype up the women's title match for later during Finn's strikes being thrown towards the midsection and on the head for good measure. Orton almost gets tossed out of the ring from an Irish whip, later receiving a rebound sidewalk slam. Hellraiser stays on offense before a lengthy chinlock gets broken up when Bob Jr. goes after the eyes. Playing dirty out of desperation, but it helps him to finally fight back and end the sequence with a running dropkick. Bob attempts a pile driver, but gets lifted onto the apron and incidentally knocked into Herb Abrams, despite Herb having a chance to move out of the way. All the while, Orton grabs a drink from the table and throws it into Thor's face, and setting off a brawl between these two that leads to the referee throwing out the match and calling for a double DQ. Steve Rossi then tries to get the fans to shout for the heel Finland Thor.
Thor! Thor! Everybody shout that! Thor!
With Bob Orton cutting a brief promo before being rushed away for another break. And now we have the first ever UWF Midget World Championship match as Little Tokyo renews an old rivalry against the Karate Kid. John Tolos recalls taking part in tag team matches with midget wrestlers as Karate Kid shows off his skills in the early going. Though Little Tokyo gets in the headlock, but quickly falls to a hip toss and seated senton. Tokyo gets sent off the ropes, hoping to knock his opponent down, only to realize Kid was hiding behind the referee to throw him off his game, with Tolos apparently claiming that Karate Kid called him.
You hear what Karate call him, a goofy Jap? Can you imagine that?
The comedy comes to an end when both guys target each other's arms, though Tokyo is able to find the edge from a test of strength while kicking out when Kid performs a monkey flip and is able to keep his opponent grounded. Tokyo rolls him over for a pin, but takes issue with referee Jesse Hernandez's slow counts and takes the time to correct it, giving Karate Kid the opening to hit the power slam as Jesse speeds his 2 count up, which frustrates Tokyo. Both midget wrestlers trade full Nelson holds, with Kid finding a unique way to break the count on the ropes by just dropping Tokyo onto the mat. Karate Kid nails a few head scissors, but Tokyo avoids the dropkick, as he then stops a corner running attack with the double throat thrust that keeps the Karate Kid down long enough for him to score the win and the Midget World Championship. Herb Abrams celebrates Tokyo being wrestling's first midget champion and, well...
What do you have to say?
Now,
Sosaki?
oh, sake.
Sake.
Yeah. Drink sake tonight.
We drink sake tonight.
Yeah, collaboration, right?
You say kampai?
Kampai, yes.
I say...
How you know kampai?
How do I know kampai? Yeah. I used to be married to a Japanese girl.
Oh, yeah?
Which I'm assuming Abrams was making a joke about, but considering some of the crazier stories about him, it wouldn't shock me if he was. He and Mulligan congratulate Little Tokyo before going to commercial, coming back to a poorly audible interview with Sid promising to leave Las Vegas as the UWF World Champion.
What's easy, see? Sid Vicious is the unified world heavyweight champion. And brother, the history of that belt is compared to no other. Now, Steve Williams, Dr. Dad, I asked you the same question. What are your credentials? To just be able to get into the ring with Sid Vicious. Well, see, if you don't know, if you're not sure,
A revenge match is up next, as Sampson, replacing Hercules, squares off against the Irish Assassin, originally meant to be Hacksaw Jim Duggan before he signed with WCW. This international clash starts off with some tie-ups and a few attacks that aren't able to knock each other down, but the Assassin focuses on Sampson's midsection, later hitting the jumping clothesline and power slam. The beefy Irish lad misses an elbow drop and allows Sampson to cut him off with a few clotheslines and body shots. A scoop slam and suplex finally end this match to give Sampson the win, and frankly that's about 5 minutes of my life I'll never get back.
Big Dale, 7 foot tall. You know something? Look at these guys right here. You know what the heart of wrestling's all about? You don't know. That's the problem. The problem is you never had a mind, you never had a heart, and the other thing, you don't have people behind you. Let's talk about people behind you. Come on, guys. Let's walk this way. Follow me. This is what wrestling's all about. It's about the fans. Let's hear it, baby. All right. It's about being live at MGM Grand.
We return to find out whether Wild Thing's Steve Ray or Tyler Mane will be the UWF's only MGM Grand Champion. Steve gives his entrance code to a kid at ringside, but gets tossed down by the lion-themed giant once he's back in the ring. Carlo compares Tyler Mane to Big John Studd, though I don't recall Studd carrying an animal's fur coat to the ring before, as the big man gets knocked down by the Wild Thing before going out of the ring and coming back in to target Ray's left arm. The former Neutron of CMLL catches Steve off the ropes but misses the knee drop, with Steve cutting his larger opponent down and attacking the left leg. It seems to have done significant damage, as the referee keeps Ray away to check on Tyler Mane, only for Mane to pop back up and hit the back suplex. Tyler goes on offense in the corner and follows up with a rebound chokeslam, hoping to end the match with a middle rope knee drop, but Ray dodges and causes more damage to the left knee. Steve gets his comeback started, but is stopped when Maine pulls the rope down to send his opponent flying to the outside. Ray gets on the apron to attempt the sunset flip, with Tyler being able to keep his balance and even use the ropes to help keep Steve down for the cover to win the venue-themed title belt. Walthane has words with Mystery Electricity about the finish, but Tyler gets handed his championship as well as the last laugh at Steve Ray's expense. Let's segue to the UWF Women's World Championship match, as Candi Devine, or as Steve Rossi pronounces it,
Candi Devine
looks to redeem her loss from Beach Brawl and become the new women's champion against Tina Moretti in place of Magnificent Mimi. Candi backdrops the future Ivory in the early going, but just as quickly falls to a dropkick, with the two brawling at ringside and showing no mercy against each other. Getting back in the ring, both women keep the action grounded as Devine then tosses Moretti out of the corner to gain some momentum. Tina dodges a clothesline and gets a 2 off a few cradles, but pays for it when Candi starts getting more vicious with her in the corner, choking her on the top rope to set up a massive power slam to finally win the UWF Women's World Championship. Here's an interesting factoid in relation to the title. While Ivory would come up short to take the UWF Women's title belt, her future rival in the WWF, Jacqueline, back when she was known as Miss Texas, will not only dethrone Candi Devine of the belt at a USWA event in December of '94, but also be the final UWF Women's World Champion ever. Dr. Death Steve Williams stands in front of a cardboard cutout of himself, telling Sid Vicious he has respect for him since he hasn't been able to get any other major name to challenge him for the UWF title, and there's probably a good reason for that, but will still end up retaining the belt. One last vacant championship will be decided as the Killer Bees step up to the new Powers of Pain, with Power Warrior taking Barbarian's spot in this World Tag Team title match. Power Warrior and B. Brian Blair start things off, with Warrior casually showing off his strength and Blair getting very few openings to cut him off after some tests of strength. A missed elbow drop finally gives Jim Brunzell a chance to tag in, but an eye rake does the same for the Warlord when Jim later escapes an attempted bear hug as Brian Blair comes back in to target the left arm, but gets slammed and stopped for a literal second or two. Warrior is tagged back in and tripped onto the mat, getting dragged into the Killer Bee's corner with the two going to work on the legs of the half Power of Pain. Warlord gets fired up, waiting to tag back into the match, all while Blair keeps Power Warrior near the center of the squared circle with a leg lock. Warrior finally pushes B. Brian away, with Blair running off the ropes and Warlord pulling down the top rope to send him flying. Warlord slams him back first into the ring post and is finally the legal man for his team to continue dishing punishment onto Blair. Warrior comes back to finally lock in the bear hug, with Warlord attempting a second rope axe handle only for Brian to get the leg up. Jumping Jim comes in like a house of fire against the Power Warrior, monkey flipping and drop kicking him. Brunzell catapults Warrior into a diving clothesline from Blair for a cover attempt, only for Brian to move and Warlord to accidentally elbow drop his partner. This whole sequence leads to a ref bump, which is kinda shocking it took until the third to last match tonight to finally get one, with the other Power Twin spawning out of nowhere and going into the ring to take his brother's place. The cameras completely miss Blair dodging an assisted axe handle from the new Powers of Pain, as Brunzell brings the referee back into the ring to make the 3 count and crown the Killer Bees the UWF's World Tag Team Champions. Funnily enough, the Power Warriors tried to do what the Killer Bees did back at Beach Brawl, but were unable to find that same success in Sin City. Our semi-main event is up next, as Cactus Jack faces the man he hitchhiked 200 miles to Madison Square Garden to see in that steel cage match, Superfly Jimmy Snuka in a lumberjack match. The wrestlers head around the ring after both competitors make their entrances, while John Tolos mentions what happened to Foley's ear. Snuka traps Jack in the headlock as Cactus escapes but gets sent down with a shoulder block. Jimmy maintains control for a few more moments before getting hit with a kitchen sink that sends him to ringside as the Lumberjacks put him back right in towards some punches from Cactus. Foley makes the mistake of headbutting an Anoa'i family member and receives one of his own, going out of the ring and doing everything to fight off the Lumberjacks until he's finally forced back in. Herb joins in on commentary as Cactus ducks a rebound attack and sends Jimmy onto the announce table, with everyone grouping towards the table to get Snuka back into the ring. Snuka fights them while Jack throws another table towards him, and yet the match isn't called for a DQ because of that. When things finally settle down, Cactus traps the Superfly in a chinlock while the other wrestlers try to get the crowd into the match. Snuka fights back and attempts to attack Jack, but somehow sends himself flying over the top rope after a failed shoulder block. And now the mayhem begins when Cactus follows Jimmy to ringside and starts rolling in spite of the Lumberjacks surrounding them, as both guys want to keep it going wherever they please, and end up escaping their grasp when the Lumberjacks start fighting with one another. This leads to one of the more memorable moments of Blackjack Brawl, with Snuka and Jack going up to the empty stands of the MGM Grand Garden as the referee calls for the bell, and this match ends in a double countout. Okay, amongst the many lessons that should have been learned from Beach Brawl, how is having a countout finish in a match type where countouts should not even be a possibility not one of those lessons? Well, as Mick would later reveal in Have a Nice Day, this was due to Herb not wanting Jack to lose while Cactus wasn't going to lie down for Snuka. During their fight up in the stands, B. Brian Blair was astonished at the finish, saying, quote, "But you can't do that in a lumberjack match." To which Foley replied, "Hey, it's Herb's show. We can do anything." Snuka suplexes Cactus onto the empty chairs as the wrestlers and fans try to get a closer look at the action before going to another break. And thank God we're finally at the main event of the show. Herb fires up the crowd for the UWF World Heavyweight Championship match, as Sid Vicious looks to dethrone the champion, Dr. Death Steve Williams.
And it's time to get rocking and rolling, and I'm getting out of here.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Mr. Rossi. Both men trade exchanges in the early going, with Steve attempting to knock the big man down until a big boot helps Sid finally send Dr. Death to the mat. Vicious tries to damage the arms of Williams with a submission, as he looks like he's about to hit the unprettier when Steve reverses and gets to the ropes to break up the hold. The two go back to trading holds for a few moments before a chokeslam helps the master and ruler of the world regain control over the UWF champion. Sending Dr. Death into the corner, Sid Justice delivers some punches before hammer throwing him across to the opposite side. Williams manages to get in a few shots until Vicious cuts him off and stays focused on attacking, using the middle rope to choke his opponent out and hit a body slam that only gets him a 2. The action once again goes to the mat when Dr. Death tries to fight back, even attacking with a knife-edge chop that echoes in the practically empty arena. Williams is able to get the foot up to block a running attack and nail a running lariat that can only stop Sid briefly, with Psycho getting the near fall off a rebound power slam before going back to some more mat-based wrestling. The announcers continue hyping the next Blackjack Brawl events that aren't meant to be while Williams fights out of the grounded chinlock, getting enough adrenaline to block Sid's attacks and nail a power slam that Sid kicks out of at 1. The boards of the ring start to pop up out of place, quite an appropriate symbol of this entire show, as Williams fails to land a diving attack when Sid blocks him. Sid attempts his own dive when Steve cuts him off and suplexes him back down onto the ring that Carlo correctly states won't last for much longer. Dr. Death looks to end things with the gut-wrench sit-out powerbomb until Dan Spivey runs in to attack Steve Williams and have our main event title match end in a disqualification just for the Skyscrapers to reunite. For fuck's sake. Sid hits the powerbomb despite losing his chance to win the belt, as the two get out of the ring when Johnny Ace comes out with a chair and helps Herb Abrams along with the medical staff to check on the unconscious world champion. Herb interviews Steve after he's made it to his feet, proposing a rematch to take place inside of a steel cage, with Dr. Death essentially telling him to make it happen before ending the promo by saying,
I'll tell you something. You haven't heard the last of us.
Something tells me we have, Mr. Williams. Blackjack Brawl gets ready to wrap up as the Skyscrapers confront Herbie and Blackjack Mulligan in the ring, taking it back to the Golden Greek and Carlo Gianelli recapping everything we've seen, and John Tolos once again makes a prediction that doesn't come to fruition.
And if you think this brawl was something, wait until you get the next one. It's going to be even more treacherous, more vicious.
Before heading back to Herb and Mulligan one final time as the Universal Wrestling Federation's last ever event comes to a close. If you know the story of Herb Abrams and the UWF, you'll surely be flabbergasted to hear that the talent's checks bounced after the event. Though Abrams and Steve Ray struck a deal with MGM to lend some cash, reportedly $100,000, to keep the production crew and some of the talent paid, he still lacked enough funds to cover the rest. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. This was an unbearable show to sit through and somehow feels even more of a mess to watch than Beach Brawl was. Blackjack Brawl ended up being voted as the Wrestling Observer's worst major wrestling card of 1994, and in some ways, I can see why that was the case, as Herb tried to throw everything at the wall just for anything to stick and help keep the Universal Wrestling Federation hanging in there just a bit longer. Production was messy at times, and while it's understandable for a live special to have some slight hiccups, I can't really say that when there were instances of spots not being shown or audio issues with both the live feed and a pre-taped segment or two. I didn't mind John Tolos on commentary, but Carlo Gianelli was not a great play-by-play announcer depending on what was going on in the ring. The majority of matches felt underwhelming or a waste of time, with some of the finishes just happening from out of left field or to simply help everyone from not having to take the loss. And just because Herbie felt the need to add new title belts for most of them to try and add some excitement and buzz doesn't change the quality, or at times lack thereof, from bell to bell. To be fair about the in-ring action, I will say that I enjoyed the junior heavyweight title match, the midget world title match, and even some of the women's title match despite the brief time they were given. But regardless of those few bright spots, a lot of them would be overshadowed by Mr. Electricity himself and how he barely carried himself throughout Blackjack Brawl. For better or worse, Herb's behavior and comments on SportsChannel that night were ultimately the final curtain call on the Universal Wrestling Federation, despite the promotion still considered active without running another taping. Herb would license footage of Fury Hour to ESPN2 and be carried over into ESPN Classic, where the show would air and likely be discovered by many for the first time through reruns for the next several years. Herb himself would step away from the UWF and the wrestling industry as a whole when he went back to New York to look after his mother, and over the next year and a half, Seemed like he was finally getting his life back on track and getting away from the cocaine and temptations that had been problematic to both himself and his wrestling company for so long. However, this turned out to be a brief yet unfortunate glimpse of hope, as on July 23, 1996, Herb Abrams would pass away of a heart attack through the most over-the-top circumstances possible. Something involving baby oil, destroyed furniture, and, as B. Brian Blair would best put it,
the one thing I know is that Herb Abrams left this world doing what he loved: cocaine and hookers.
I ended the Beach Brawl video by saying that Herb Abrams was determined and passionate to get his own wrestling company into the national spotlight during the UWF's early years. But Blackjack Brawl was also an example of when he would overpromise something incredible and then underdeliver when it was showtime. Hell, he even did it for a pair of boots that were barely noticeable in front of the very few to witness them. Despite a lot of his flaws, both in and out of professional wrestling, Herb Abrams was still able to do things with his Universal Wrestling Federation that not many promotions would do or would wait to years later. Whether it be cookies based on the different wrestlers, running a show at a major hotspot such as the MGM Grand, or even be the first promoter who became an on-screen authority figure on their own shows. The best way to look back on not just Blackjack Brawl, but all of Abrams and his version of the UWF is of a shooting star, Herb being someone who started off with a bright and charismatic personality, being able to put together a dream that had potential, but eventually, that same star loses its light and attraction before finally extinguishing. And while it came through in such short time, it leaves a lasting impact that will be remembered by those who got to be there from beginning to the bitter end.